We waste so much of our most valuable resource, time. So I'm gonna show you my time management system to help you make the most of the time you're putting in and also save a whole bunch of it so you can use it in other areas. Now, if you're like me, you've probably been in this situation, right? Think about this for a second. You ever get to the end of the week, if that's Friday for you, or maybe it's Sunday evening, whatever your weekend is, and you look back and you say, wow, I was busy. I certainly did a lot of stuff this week. But then you look at your to-do list and you realize there's still a bunch of stuff on it. You didn't get everything done. And the sense of dread and the sense of overwhelm that starts to hit you as you realize now you have all these other things you got to add to your schedule for next week, and that week's going to be even crazier as a result. And a lot of us just continue to go through this cycle every single week until we get to the point where we're burnt out, right? That's become a real issue in our society and our economy. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna walk you through my system for managing my schedule and my time. Now, this is a system I learned in college. It's something I've been using, I will say off and on, but I'd like to say consistently since that time. But whenever I have used it, I have been a lot more efficient, a lot more impactful. And the big thing here too is I've been much more calm. I've felt more collected, I felt more confident, and I have not had to feel that sense of overwhelm because I know I had a plan to get everything I needed to done. So let's dive in here. I'm gonna show you how this process works. There's a few steps to this time management approach, but once you've done it a few times, it will become second nature. It's not that complicated. Now, before I go through showing you how to do this, I wanna make sure you understand you're gonna need to do this for at least a few weeks before you can assess if it's working for you or not, all right? The first week or two, there are gonna be some hiccups. You're gonna make some incorrect assumptions, and you're probably gonna have to go back and figure a few things out, right? But as you start to do it, you start to build the habit, you're gonna find that your weeks are a lot more productive and that you feel a lot less stressed, right? So the first thing you need to do is you wanna pull up a blank sheet of paper or a document online. I'm using a Google Doc right here. And we're gonna make a master list of absolutely everything we need to get done over the next 7 days. And I wanna emphasize here that this includes some of the more minor things you may not have been putting into your schedule currently, right? So for instance, lunch, breakfast, dinner, getting ready for work, getting ready for bed in the evening. If we wanna have time to watch TV for a few hours or spend some time with our family, that needs to go in here. So the idea is not to just schedule our work time, it's to schedule everything we do, because ultimately everything we do has an impact on how much we can get done in a given week. So I don't necessarily need to get super minor if I've got a 30-second returning a phone call, or I've got, I got to drop a letter in the mail. That can all sort of be lumped into maybe a miscellaneous time block of a half an hour at some point. But anything that makes up about a 15-minute or larger increment in your schedule should be added here, all right? Let me just go ahead and write out a few real quick. Okay, so again, I'm just giving a sort of brief introduction here, but I went ahead and wrote down a few of the things that might be added to my schedule over the coming week. Now, once you have your entire list, and what I want you to do is, it's 10, 15, 20 minutes on this. You can take your time here. You wanna make sure this is exhaustive. Now, once you have your list, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna assign an amount of time to each of these things, right? So keep in mind here as you're going through with something like breakfast, you're either gonna wanna write breakfast 7 different times because it's gonna go into 7 different days, or you're gonna write it once, but you're gonna make sure to make a note that it's half an hour each day, right? So I usually like to use half and 1 hour increments. So I'm gonna say 0.5 hours, 7 days, all right? And same thing for my preparing for work here, right? I might say that I need a half an hour to prepare for work, and that's going to be 5 days of the week, right? Now, these other things, they might not be recurring, so maybe it's just, an overall amount of time. And again, you can break them down into smaller and smaller increments all the way down to a half hour. So if you, for instance, have specific sales meetings that you're gonna need to do, maybe you wanna break those up and put them in as their own actual meetings. But if I say here, I've got 5 hours of sales meetings, those aren't on necessarily specific days. Maybe they're not even scheduled yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I have the time allotted for them. I have to do a presentation for a couple real estate offices, so I'm gonna say that is 1 hour, but really realistically they're 1.5 hours because I gotta have some prep before and after. So I'm gonna put that in for each of these. Writing my weekly blog post, I'm gonna give myself 2 hours. I gotta spend 2 hours training the VA. And let's go ahead and say that processing these renewals will take 1 hour, all right? Now, again, you wanna make sure you have everything you're going to need to do on this list. That is very important, all right? If you don't have everything, you're not gonna be able to structure your schedule correctly. So assume I've got another 30, 40 things written out here and I've got my entire list. Then the next thing you're gonna do, well, let me say this first. You're gonna have to guess in some cases, right? Some things you're gonna know how long they take, others you won't. One of the cool things about this process is that over time, you're gonna start to get better at guessing, and you're also going to start to just naturally become more efficient. Just by monitoring these things and trying to guess how long they're gonna take, it's going to gradually make you more efficient overall, right? So you're gonna be guessing, but don't worry too much about that. If you end up scheduling something for 2 hours, it takes 4 and it messes up your schedule for this week, that's okay. I'm gonna talk about how to handle that. But make sure that as you go, you continue to work on getting better at guessing, right? So I go ahead and make my list. I've guessed as to how long each of those things are gonna take. I've marked it off, right? Now, the next thing you need to do before you move on is you need to add up these hours and make sure that they make sense, right? We got 19 hours, obviously. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna treat this as like maybe 2 or 3 days for the purpose of the demonstration, right? So 19 hours total. Here's the thing, when you do this math, if you come up with something that is way too many hours, right? And keep in mind, these are not just your work hours, these are also your free time hours, right? So basically what you're gonna wanna do is just sort of figure out how many waking hours do you have in a given week, right? You gotta subtract your time for sleeping, and then what's left is your awake time, right? So does this fit into that time or not? And it shouldn't just barely fit. If you've got so many things that there's no flexibility, you probably have too many items in your schedule. Here's the nice thing about this is you can determine this before you start to put it into the calendar. So when you look at the total hours right now, if that number is too high, start pulling things out. And what you need to do is you need to ask yourself what is urgent and what's important, right? What are the things that are really essential to driving my business or my personal life forward, and make sure those things are still in there. But if there's something, for instance, that was a nice to get done this week but doesn't have to happen, that's gonna come out at this point, all right? So you wanna make sure that everything you have fits into the hours you have available, and that there's wiggle room, right? I mean, I would wanna have at least 10, maybe as much as 20 to 30 hours of just open time where it's not committed to doing anything, right? So we're gonna add it all up, we're gonna make sure that the hours make sense. Now, before we go and start putting this into our calendar, this is a really important step. We are going to assign an A, B, or a C to each item. These are not priorities though. What we're actually assigning to each is how flexible that particular item is in our calendar, right? So for instance, A's are going to be the kinds of things that cannot be moved, okay? So let me show you my examples of those. These two presentations are going to both be A's because guess what? They're already scheduled, right? So I can't move them. They have to go in first. So anything that is for sure has to happen at that time has to be an A, right? Now, if you look at the rest of this stuff, write the blog post, that could probably happen at any time. Train the VAs, that could happen most hours, but our virtual assistant needs to be available to meet with, right? Processing renewals, that could happen at any time. Preparing for work, breakfast, those have to happen again at the beginning of the day, but they're a little bit flexible. And then sales meetings, assuming that they're not already scheduled, are also somewhat flexible, right? So none of those other things are guaranteed locked in, but anything that is existing meetings, appointments, whatever it might be, those are A level, right? Now, what are B's? B level is going to be the types of items in your schedule that can be flexible, but they have to happen during certain time windows, right? So an example of that would be, for instance, training the VA, right? So I'm gonna put a B in front of training the VA because they only have certain times they're available. They can't necessarily meet with me in the middle of the night, or there's gonna be certain windows where they cannot meet. So that's gonna be a B level priority, right? Same thing is gonna go for breakfast. It is a little flexible, but it has to happen in the morning and preparing for work. And then let's look at sales meetings. Sales meetings, that's a B as well, right? Because people have to meet with us probably during the work day. But we are still left at this point with two other items: write the weekly blog posts and process renewals. And those are both things that are just, they only really require my time and my focus, and they can hypothetically be done at any time of the day, right? So in that case, those are my C's. Those are my priorities that are 100% flexible, all right? So what we do is we assign these A, B, and C levels to all of the items on this list, right? Make sure, again, you're doing a comprehensive measure of all this. And keep in mind, at this point, you're mostly done. Inserting this into your schedule is actually gonna be the easy step, but this will have taken some time. Do not rush it. Do not miss something. The worst thing that can possibly happen here is you come into the week thinking you went through and planned everything and you actually missed a couple items, right? So really think about it, look it over, double check. You know, if this part takes you up to 45 minutes, that's okay, right? An hour a week of planning is not that much time ultimately, because you're gonna get a lot more in return for that, right? Once this is done, now we're gonna go ahead and transition over to the calendar, right? Once we get into our scheduling, right, we're gonna go in the order in which we put these things in, right? So first, I'm gonna look at my A's. I have that educational presentation for Keller Williams. Let's see that one, and I'm making this up on the spot, obviously, just for demo purposes, but we're gonna say that one is at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, right? Now I put an hour and a half in for it, so what I probably wanna do is actually bump it forward by 15 minutes and bump it back by 15 minutes as well, giving me a total of an hour and a half, right? So say KW presentation here, and we will save that. All right, so that's the first thing we've added. We also have to look at the other presentation I have. That one's at 1 o'clock Wednesday, so I'm gonna go ahead and start that. Again, bump it back to 12:45, bump it up to 2:15, and this is my EXP presentation. All right, so that one's in there. Okay, so my A's are done, right? Now I go to my B's. Well, first of all, I got breakfast. I'm not gonna schedule breakfast in all 7 days because you don't need to watch me do that, but I am gonna make sure I put it in. So, you know, it's gotta happen. I'm gonna, you know, do it sometime between 8 and 9 a.m. I'd probably also have, you know, workout, that kind of stuff listed here. But for demo purposes, I'm gonna say it's a half an hour. And so I'm gonna do this at 8 o'clock actually, all right? So I'm gonna put breakfast in, again, adjust it down to a half hour. And, you know, I'll put a couple of these in here. Again, stuff like this, if it is on the same day every single time, you could just make it recurring, right? Which you could do by clicking here, does not repeat, and changing it, right? Daily, weekly, you know, you got all kinds of awesome options to make it recurring. But for now, I'm just gonna put it in manually. So I'm just gonna do these first 3 days. So I'll put breakfast in each of these 3 days. And then I'm also going to put getting ready for work, which is another half an hour. Okay, there we go. So prep for work is now in there as well. All right, so as I'm going here, by the way, I probably do wanna be marking these off. So what I would do is just sort of, you know, cross them off, or, you know, you can strike them through, or you could just change the format or something like that on them. I'm just gonna switch them. I'm gonna highlight them as bold once they have been added, so we know it's been done, all right? Okay, now what else do I have? I got train my VAs. So I know my VAs, because of our time difference, are available only in the morning, right? I'm just, again, making this up as we go, but let's say that they're only available in the morning, so I'm gonna look at these 3 mornings. I'm gonna say, okay, here at 9 a.m. on Monday, that's when I'm gonna train my virtual assistant, all right? And it's 2 hours, so I'm gonna go ahead and select 2 hours and put that in. Now, a quick side note here, I work from home, I work virtually most of the time, so if you do a lot of driving, make sure you schedule in the driving time, right? That's something that's kind of easy to overlook, and as you're inserting these things, make sure you give yourself a lot of wiggle room there. You wanna, you know, if it's gonna take a half an hour to drive somewhere, give yourself 45 minutes or an hour so that you have time to get out to the car and, you know, get your stuff together to leave, all that kind of stuff, right? So make sure you're considering sort of peripheral needs, but most of what I do is just sitting here at this desk, which is pretty convenient, right? So we put the VAs in there, let's highlight that. Next, we're gonna add sales meetings. We got 5 hours of sales meetings. Now, here's the thing, right? You may not know when those sales meetings are yet. In fact, that's kind of how I treated this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna just put in some time that I'm blocking off, and we're just gonna say these are where the sales meetings will likely go. So that's 2 hours. I'm gonna have another 2 hours here on Monday, and I'll add an hour on Tuesday as well, all right? Now, if these things get scheduled at different times, I can always move them around, right? Just because we're doing our planning doesn't mean this has to be permanent. This is a starting point, this is a plan, right? We can make adjustments to a plan. So those are all in there where they are, but if all of a sudden somebody schedules this sales meeting for 12 on Monday and that is open when they do so, I'm just gonna delete one of these hours and move it there, right? Easy enough. Okay, so let's go ahead and highlight that as done, and that means that all of our B-level priorities are finished, right? So once those are all done, and again, sales meetings had to happen during the business day, now I can add my writing my weekly blog post, and also processing renewals, which one is 2 and one is 1 hour, right? Now these could go anywhere. I mean, I could come down here and say, okay, at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, I'm gonna write my blog post, right? And if you are the kind of person that's working those types of hours, that's fine, right? So let's go ahead and put that in. I'm gonna expand it down to 2 hours, right? So maybe I'm gonna move that up to 6. So let's say we're doing it 6 to 8 on Tuesday night, right? Now, again, I'm not saying you have to schedule things in the evening, but just showing you obviously that you certainly can. And then process renewals, I'm gonna find another time during a weekday where I can add that. We're gonna put this in here. All right, so at this point, it looks like I'm done, but I'm not quite done. I'm gonna ask you to do one additional thing, and that is to review this calendar and make sure that you have one of 2 options. Either you have white space and there's enough of it, or you have buffer time that's been scheduled in, right? Now, why do I leave it as white space instead of labeling it as actual buffer time? In my experience, if you leave it as white space, that makes it easier for people to schedule if you use those third-party scheduling tools. I use one called SavvyCal. So I need to leave it blank. It makes it easy for people to go ahead and schedule themselves into those time slots. However, if you want, you can block them off and just call it buffer time. But here's what I want you to think about. Have at least 2 hours a day of buffer time. Now, as you get more and more experience doing this, if you need to, you can start to cut down on that because you're really good at planning and you know you don't need as much wiggle room. But buffer time is super important, right? So let's say I put buffer time in here for 2 hours. What that means is not that I don't work for that time, it means that that allows me flexibility. So let's say my training and my VAs goes a half hour long. Well, that can creep over into buffer time, right? Or let's say one of my sales meetings actually gets scheduled here, I can switch that time to later. And so the buffer time allows for flexibility, right? And you can just straight up use it, right? So if something's taking longer than it has to, it goes into the buffer time. If you get ahead and you have extra time and you don't need to use that buffer, get ahead on what you're doing and go home early that day, right? I mean, that's a great thing, good for you. You don't necessarily need to find additional work because you did a good job planning, right? And that's it. Once this is all in there, now you know, here's the beauty of this, right? If you do this work, it's about 1 hour or so a week, and you may even get to the point where it's just a half hour a week, now you know everything's gonna get done. Think about the mental clarity, the sense of calm that you're gonna get as a result of this. Now you know that everything you're going to do will get finished and that you even have the flexibility to make adjustments as you go. That sense of laying there in bed at night, thinking about all the things that you still need to get done will go away almost entirely. And I speak from first-hand experience, right? I did this, it blew my mind. I first learned this system back in college. When I was in college, I was taking 15-hour full course load, but I was also working multiple other jobs, which totaled at least 30 hours a week, sometimes over 50 hours a week, on top of going to school. And I was the one at 10 p.m. who was done with my homework and was sitting on the couch playing video games while my friends were all still struggling to get everything done because I was super structured. I used this system the entire time, and I was probably twice as productive as a lot of my peers in school, right? And so obviously I've been using it ever since. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed, if you ever felt, like you couldn't get everything done, try this system out and you may be shocked at the impact that this has for you, all right? So if you liked this video, I hope you did. I hope you got some value here. I really want to encourage you to subscribe. This will allow you to do a better job of planning for your video production. So that's a big reason we talk about time management so much, is if you have a structured schedule, you're going to get those videos created and posted, all right? So get out there, make some more videos, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.